Middletown, Ohio. Population over 14,000 according to the latest census. A typical American town where Main Street is still the center of community life and locals know each other by name. Here, church bells ring on Sundays and scandals spread faster than CNN News. In this town, where the most sensational event in the last 5 years was the theft of a bicycle from the high school, Trudy and Shane Thompson were considered a model couple. 4 years of marriage, their own house on Maple Avenue, a successful business for her husband, and a steady job for her at the town's most popular beauty salon. Trudy Thompson, 28 years old, was one of those people you couldn't help but notice. Tall, with chestnut hair that she knew how to style so that every strand fell perfectly, she had a natural charisma that drew customers to Glamour Studio like a magnet. Her laughter could be heard across Main Street, and her ability to connect with anyone made her a favorite in the town. Trudy was the kind of person who could talk to anyone about anything, recalls Doris Wilson, owner of a local bakery and a regular customer at the salon. She knew all the kids in town by name and remembered the birthdays of half the people who lived here. When I came in to get my hair cut, we could chat for hours. Shane Thompson, 31, was the complete opposite of his wife. Quiet and focused, he had built his construction company, Thompson Construction, from the ground up, working 14 hours a day. In a town where most men worked in the factory or local shops, Shane stood out for his ambition and determination. Shane was one of those guys who never sat still, says Tom Madison, a longtime friend of the family and supplier of building materials. If he wasn't working on a construction site, he was planning new projects at home. I remember him telling me about his plans to expand the business, about how he wanted to build the most beautiful house in town for Trudy and their future children. Their house on Maple Avenue really stood out from the rest. 2 stories high, with white columns and a perfectly manicured lawn, it seemed like the embodiment of the American dream. Shane personally oversaw every aspect of the construction, from the foundation to the last shingle on the roof. But behind the facade of prosperity, the first cracks in their relationship were beginning to show. Shane, consumed by his work, came home late more and more often, tired and irritable. Trudy, who spent her days at the salon amid chatter and laughter, came home to a silent husband who ate dinner in front of the TV, leafing through construction catalogs. They seemed happy, but I noticed changes, admits Jen Martinez, Trudy's best friend and salon colleague. Trudy started talking less about Shane. She used to talk all the time about what he said, what he was planning, how their weekends went. And then those stories just stopped. Glamour Studio was located in the heart of Main Street, between Mrs. Wilson's bakery and an antique shop. Large windows allowed passers-by to see what was going on inside, and the bright pink sign was visible from a distance. For many women in Midtown, the salon was not just a place to get their hair done. It was the center of their social life. Trudy had been working there for 6 years, starting as a simple stylist after completing a hairdressing course in a neighboring town. Her natural talent and people skills quickly made her the most sought-after stylist in the salon. Clients booked appointments with her weeks in advance, and some even came from neighboring towns. Trudy had a special gift, says Linda Harris, the salon's owner. She could look at a woman and immediately know what hairstyle would suit her, how to emphasize her best features. But most importantly, she knew how to listen. Women trusted her with their secrets, their problems, their joys. I often said that Trudy wasn't just a hairdresser, she was a psychologist. Last March, Trudy and Shane received the long-awaited news that they were expecting a baby. The pregnancy was a ray of hope for their faltering relationship. Shane, who had always dreamed of a big family, was over the moon. He started planning to remodel one of the rooms into a nursery, bought books on parenting, and even cut back on his work hours to spend more time with his wife. When Trudy got pregnant, Shane changed, recalls neighbor Robert Davis. He smiled more and started talking about their future as a family. I remember him showing me his plans for the nursery. He wanted to make it the most beautiful nursery in town. For Trudy, pregnancy was a time of mixed feelings. On the one hand, she was happy to finally become a mother. She and Shane had been trying to conceive for almost 2 years. On the other hand, the physical changes and hormonal fluctuations intensified her feelings of alienation in the marriage. "Trudy was beautiful when she was pregnant," says Jen, "but I could see that she wasn't always happy. Sometimes she would sit in the salon after work and just stare out the window. When I asked her what was wrong, she would say everything was fine, but I knew her better than anyone." By the 7th month of her pregnancy, Trudy was still working at the salon, even though her doctor advised her to cut back. She insisted that work distracted her from her worries and that interacting with customers lifted her spirits. Shane didn't object. He trusted his wife and was proud of her independence. It was around this time that a new security guard appeared at the salon. After a series of thefts at stores on Main Street, the owners decided to increase security. Midtown Security sent Marcus Wright, a 33-year-old former military man with an impeccable reputation, to the salon. Marcus was the complete opposite of Shane. Where Trudy's husband was quiet and reserved, the security guard was outgoing and charismatic. His military bearing and self-confidence did not go unnoticed by the salon's employees. "Everyone liked Marcus right away," recalls Linda Harris. "He was polite and professional, but he could also hold a conversation with any of the girls. The clients noticed him too. Some even started joking that now it was nice to go to the salon not just for the haircuts." During his first few weeks, Marcus kept to himself and acted professional. He'd show up at work at 8 a.m. sharp, check the salon, make sure the alarm was on, and then take his spot at the front desk. During his lunch break, he'd usually go outside for a smoke and say hi to the other employees. But gradually, the atmosphere began to change. Marcus started staying after work, helping the girls take out the trash or close the salon. He brought coffee for all the employees in the morning and joked with the clients, creating a relaxed atmosphere in the salon. "He was very attentive," says one of the regular customers, who wished to remain anonymous. "He remembered our names and asked how we were doing. It was nice to feel that you were noticed and appreciated." At first, Trudy treated the new security guard like the rest of her colleagues, friendly, but without much interest. Her pregnancy required extra effort, and she was focused on work and preparing for motherhood. However, those around her began to notice changes in Trudy's behavior. She started spending more time at the reception desk, where Marcus usually stood. Their conversations grew longer, and Trudy's laughter rang out more often and more loudly when the security guard was nearby. "I remember the day when everyone realized," says Jen. "It was at the end of August. Trudy was standing at the window, looking out at the street, and suddenly she laughed. I asked her what was so funny, and she pointed to Marcus, who was helping an elderly woman carry her bags to her car. 'Look how gentlemanly he is,' she said, and there was something special in her voice." At home, Trudy found herself thinking more and more about work, her colleagues, and the new security guard. Shane, absorbed in preparing for fatherhood and new projects, didn't notice the change in his wife's mood. He believed that pregnancy was making her happier, that the prospect of motherhood was filling her life with new meaning. Shane was so focused on the future child that he didn't see what was happening to his wife here and now, reflects family friend Tom Madison. He was buying baby toys, reading books on child development, planning family trips. In his mind, they were already the perfect family of 3. By the end of August, the tension in the Thompson home was evident to close friends. Shane worked even harder, trying to finish major projects before the baby was born, while Trudy spent more and more time at the salon, often staying late after the official end of the workday. "They were like 2 ships passing in the night," says neighbor Robert Davis. Shane would leave for the construction site early in the morning while Trudy was still asleep. She would come home from work, and he would be in the garage working on some blueprints or fixing tools. Even on weekends, they rarely spent time together. Evenings at the Maple Avenue house became quiet and tense. At dinner, Shane talked about work, construction projects, plans for the future, but Trudy listened distractedly, often distracted by her phone or just staring out the window. "I remember one conversation with Trudy in early September," Jen says. "We were cleaning up the living room after work, and she suddenly said, 'You know, Jen, "Sometimes I feel lonely in my own home." I asked her what she meant, and she replied, "Shane works so much that we hardly talk. And when we do talk, it's only about the baby and the future. It's as if the present doesn't exist." September brought the first signs of fall to Midtown. The leaves on Main Street began to turn yellow, and the morning air grew cooler. For Trudy Thompson, who was 8 months pregnant, these changes symbolized the inner turmoil unfolding in her life. Her relationship with Marcus had begun unnoticed, as is often the case with the most dangerous attachments. At first, it was just conversation during lunch breaks. Marcus, who smoked outside the salon, noticed Trudy struggling up the steps after lunch and offered to help. "The first time he took my arm was when I slipped on the wet steps," Trudy later told Jen. "It was mid-September after it had rained. I felt how strong his hands were, how confidently he supported me. And at that moment, I realized that I hadn't felt so safe in a long time." Marcus Wright, 33, served in the Army for 8 years, including 2 tours in Afghanistan. After returning home, he divorced his wife, who was unable to cope with his post-traumatic stress disorder. Working as a security guard in a quiet town was a way for him to find peace and stability. Marcus was a very neat person, recalls Linda Harris, the salon owner. "He always came on time, his uniform was ironed, his shoes were polished, but there was a sadness in him that he hid behind his smile and jokes. Women sense these things." For Trudy, Marcus's attention was a breath of fresh air in her increasingly stifling family life. Shane, consumed with preparing for the birth of his child, became even more obsessed with work. He was working on 2 major projects at once, trying to make as much money as possible before the baby arrived. "Shane was like a man possessed," says his business partner Tom Madison. "He would say to me, 'Tom, I'm going to have a son or daughter, and I have to provide for them.' He was making plans for 5 years down the road, wanted to buy land for a new house, open a branch of the company in a neighboring town. Noble intentions, but he forgot about the present. At home, Shane became even more silent and distant. He spent his evenings in his makeshift office in the garage, studying construction catalogs, drawing up estimates, and calling clients. Trudy ate dinner alone, watching TV and feeling the gap between them grow. "I remember that evening in late September," Trudy Jen said. "I was sitting in the kitchen eating ice cream and watching a movie. My belly was already huge, and the baby was kicking vigorously. I called Shane over so he could feel the baby kicking. He came over, put his hand on my belly for 5 seconds, said, 'Cool,' and went back to his drawings. At that moment, I realized that I felt like a single mother even before the baby was born." In the salon, everything was different. Marcus noticed every change in Trudy's mood. When she looked tired, he brought her special tea from the pharmacy that helped with pregnancy. When her back hurt, he offered her a pillow for her chair. His attention was unobtrusive but constant. Marcus was very observant, says Trudy's colleague, manicurist Susan Clark. He remembered that Trudy didn't like coffee in the morning because of morning sickness, that her feet hurt at the end of the day, that she was sad when it rained. I haven't seen that kind of attention to detail even in many husbands. The first personal conversation between Trudy and Marcus took place in early October. Trudy stayed late after work, sorting out the schedule for the following week when everyone else had already left. Marcus was doing his last round before closing the salon. "You look tired," he said, stopping at her workstation. "Maybe you should finish up early. Pregnancy is a lot of stress on the body." "My husband says so too," Trudy replied without looking up from her logbook. "But work keeps me from thinking about everything else." "Everything else?" Marcus asked, and there was genuine interest in his voice, something Trudy sorely missed at home. Trudy looked up and really saw Marcus for the first time. Tall, with dark hair and gray eyes, he stood leaning slightly toward her, and there was a warmth in his gaze that she had almost forgotten. "Loneliness," she said quietly, and the words hung in the air between them. From that day on, their relationship changed. They began to stay after work, talking about everything and nothing. Marcus told her about his time in the army and how difficult it was to get used to civilian life. Trudy talked about her dreams, about how she had imagined her life when she married Shane. He listened to me as if every word I said was important, Trudy later confessed to Jen. When I talked to Shane, I always had the feeling that he was thinking about something else. But Marcus was completely there, with me. Jen Martinez, Trudy's best friend, was the first to notice the changes. Trudy started getting ready for work differently. She chose her clothes more carefully, spent more time in front of the mirror, and even started wearing new perfume. I worked next to Trudy for 6 years, Jen says. I knew all her habits, moods, gestures, and then suddenly she started to change. She began checking her watch frequently, smiling for no reason, and getting nervous when Marcus was late for work. In mid-October, Jen decided to have a frank talk with her friend. After work, she kept Trudy in the salon under the pretext of discussing the new price list. "Trudy, what's going on between you and Marcus?" Jen asked bluntly. "What are you talking about?" Trudy tried to look away, but Jen knew her too well. "You're my best friend. Don't you think I see how you look at him, how he looks at you? You're playing with fire, Trudy." Trudy was silent for a few minutes, then suddenly burst into tears. The pregnancy made her emotions more intense, and the pent-up tension needed an outlet. "I didn't plan this, Jen," she said through her tears. "It just happened. He makes me feel alive, needed. At home, I'm like a ghost. Shane doesn't see me or hear me. But with Marcus, I feel like a woman again, not just a baby incubator." "Trudy, you're pregnant, you're married, you're going to have a baby." Jen tried to reason with her friend. "Do you think I don't think about that every second of every day?" Trudy replied. "Do you think this is easy for me? But I can't stop. For the first time in months, I feel happy." Meanwhile, the relationship between Trudy and Marcus continued to develop. At the end of October, something happened that changed their relationship forever. Trudy fell in the living room after tripping over a hairdryer cord. Marcus was nearby and caught her before she fell. "When he held me in his arms, we looked into each other's eyes," Trudy said, "and at that moment, something clicked between us. He didn't let me go for longer than necessary, and I didn't ask him to." After that incident, their relationship moved to a new level. They started texting each other. At first, it was innocent questions about how Trudy was feeling, then more personal conversations about life, dreams, and disappointments. "Marcus wrote to me every morning," Trudy Jen admitted. "He asked how I was feeling, how I slept, what I had planned for the day. Simple things, but they meant more to me than all of Shane's expensive gifts." Shane didn't notice anything. He was so absorbed in his work and preparing for fatherhood that he didn't pay attention to the changes in his wife's behavior. When Trudy stayed late at the salon, he thought she was just getting ready for maternity leave. When she started looking at her phone more often, he assumed she was reading articles about pregnancy. Shane lived in his own world, says neighbor Robert Davis. To him, Trudy was the perfect wife who would never let him down. It never even occurred to him that she might have needs that he wasn't fulfilling. In early November, the first serious conflict between Trudy and Shane occurred. He came home at midnight after working on a distant construction site and found his wife still awake, sitting on the couch and looking at her phone. "Trudy, you need to rest," Shane said. "You're pregnant. You can't stay up this late." "Where were you?" Trudy asked. "I ate dinner alone, went to bed alone, woke up alone." "When was the last time you asked how I was feeling?" "I'm working for us, for our family," Shane replied. "I thought you understood that." "I understand that you work, but I don't understand why you need a family if you're not part of it." The conversation ended with Shane going to the garage and Trudy going to bed in tears. In the morning, they pretended nothing had happened, but the rift in their relationship grew even deeper. After that fight, Trudy became even more withdrawn at home, says Jen. She told me she felt like a stranger in her own home. Shane tried to be attentive. He bought her vitamins and signed her up for prenatal classes, but it was like putting a Band-Aid on an open wound. At the salon, however, Trudy was blossoming. Her relationship with Marcus was becoming more intimate, though it remained purely emotional. They spent their lunch breaks together, walking through the autumn park behind the salon. Marcus told her about his plans for the future, how he wanted to start his own security business. He dreamed of simple things, Trudy said. A house by the lake, a dog, the ability to travel. He didn't have grandiose plans like Shane, but his dreams seemed more real, more achievable. Jen continued to try to talk her friend out of it. During one of their conversations in late November, she was particularly insistent. "Trudy, you're ruining your life," Jen said. "You're about to have a baby. Shane loves you. He just doesn't know how to show it. And Marcus is a lonely man looking for comfort. Don't let your emotions cloud your judgment." "What if I don't love Shane?" Trudy asked suddenly. "What if I married him just because it was the right thing to do? He's a good man, but we live like roommates. With Marcus, I feel what I should have felt for my husband." "But you're pregnant with his child," Jen exclaimed. "I know," Trudy replied quietly. "And that makes it even more complicated." By the end of November, the situation had reached a critical point. Trudy and Marcus were spending more and more time together. Their correspondence became more candid, and their glances more meaningful. Everyone in the salon noticed the change in their behavior, but no one dared to intervene. "It was obvious to everyone," admits Susan Clark. "They looked at each other like teenagers in love. The air in the salon literally sparkled when they were together. We all knew it would end badly, but what could we do?" Jen's last attempt to stop her friend came in early December, when Trudy was 9 months pregnant. They stayed in the salon after work, and Jen decided to be direct. "Trudy, I'm your best friend, and I have to tell you the truth. What's going on between you and Marcus isn't love. It's an escape from reality. You're unhappy in your marriage and looking for a way out, but that way out will destroy not only your life, but your child's life too." Trudy was silent for a long time, then looked at Jen with eyes full of pain. "Maybe you're right, but it's too late to change anything now. I feel something for him that I never felt for Shane. And soon everything will change anyway. The baby will be born, a new life will begin. Maybe this is my last chance to feel alive." That same evening, Trudy made a decision that would change her destiny forever. She sent Marcus a message. "I need to talk to you, seriously." December in Midtown was particularly cold. Snow covered Main Street with a thick white blanket, turning the town into a Christmas card. Garlands and tinsel appeared in shop windows, and the air was filled with the anticipation of the new year. For Trudy Thompson, who was 37 weeks pregnant, this winter was a time of painful inner conflict. Her belly had grown to an impressive size, making it difficult to move around and forcing her to constantly search for comfortable sitting positions. Her doctor strongly recommended that she quit her job and prepare for childbirth at home, but Trudy stubbornly continued to go to the salon. For her, Glamour Studio had become the only place where she felt alive. She looked tired, but she had a kind of inner glow, recalls Linda Harris, the salon owner. Pregnancy suited her. Her face had rounded out, her hair had thickened, but there was a feverish brightness in her eyes. "I thought at the time it was just pre-birth excitement." It was getting harder and harder for Trudy to work. She couldn't stand for long. Her legs swelled up by the end of the day, and her back hurt from the slightest bend. Her clients treated her with special care, some even bringing pillows and special creams for pregnant women. "We were all worried about Trudy," says regular customer Mary Jenkins. "She was so sweet, always interested in our lives, remembering all our children and grandchildren. When I saw how hard every movement was for her, I wanted to send her home to rest. But she always smiled and said, 'Work keeps my mind off my worries.'" The real reason Trudy didn't want to leave the salon was because of Marcus. By December, their relationship had reached a point where every glance, every accidental touch was charged with electricity. They had learned to communicate with their eyes across the salon, understanding each other without words. "It was painful to watch," admits Jen Martinez. "I saw how they were both suffering. Marcus tried to remain professional, but when Trudy was having a hard time, he forgot everything. And she was like a moth flying into a flame. She knew it was dangerous, but she couldn't stop. The conversation Trudy had promised to have with Marcus at the end of November took place in early December. They stayed in the salon after work when everyone else had gone home. Winter twilight fell early, and the streetlights created an intimate atmosphere in the empty salon. "Marcus, we need to talk," Trudy began, settling into a chair by the window. Her stomach prevented her from sitting comfortably, and she kept changing position. "I know," he replied, sitting down in the chair next to her. "We've gone too far, Trudy. It's getting dangerous." "What if I don't want to stop?" she asked, and there was a determination in her voice that surprised him. Marcus was silent for a long time, studying her face in the dim light. Finally, he said, "You're a married woman. You're about to have a baby. I have no right to destroy your family." "What if that family is already destroyed?" Trudy placed her hand on her stomach, where the baby was kicking vigorously. "Shane lives for his plans for the future, but he doesn't see me here and now. I feel lonely in my own home." "Trudy." Marcus reached out and gently touched her cheek. "You have no idea how hard it is for me to see you every day, knowing that I can't be there when you're hurting, when you're sad." At that moment, something happened between them that they both knew was inevitable. Marcus leaned down and kissed Trudy. It was the first real physical contact between them, and it opened the floodgates to feelings they had held back for so long. "I knew it was wrong," Trudy later told Jen, "but at that moment, I didn't care. I felt wanted, loved, alive. The last time Shane had kissed me properly was 3 months ago." From that day on, their relationship changed dramatically. They didn't cross the line. Trudy was too pregnant for physical intimacy, and both knew it would be unforgivable. But the emotional closeness between them grew so strong that it became increasingly difficult to hide. Meanwhile, Shane was preparing for fatherhood with the enthusiasm of a man who finally saw meaning in his life. He finished remodeling the nursery, turning it into a work of art. The walls were painted a soft yellow, as they had decided not to find out the sex of the baby before birth. He made the furniture himself from the finest wood. "Shane worked on that room like a man possessed," says Tom Madison. "Every detail was thought out. He showed me the blueprints for the crib he was building and told me about the special ventilation system he had installed. He said, 'My child will live in perfect conditions.'" Shane signed up for classes for future fathers, read books on parenting, and drew up a detailed plan for the first year of his child's life. He even bought a video camera to record every important moment. "He was like a kid before Christmas," said neighbor Doris Wilson. "He talked constantly about how he was going to teach the child to ride a bike, play baseball, help with homework. He planned family trips years in advance." But for all his enthusiasm, Shane didn't notice the changes in his wife's behavior. He attributed her frequent delays at the salon to her desire to earn money before her maternity leave. When she became distracted and quiet at dinner, he thought it was pre-pregnancy anxiety. He interpreted her new perfume and more careful grooming as a desire to look good despite her pregnancy. Shane saw only what he wanted to see, reflects family friend Robert Davis. To him, Trudy was the perfect wife who shared his dreams of a family. It never occurred to him that she might have her own needs and doubts. In mid-December, an incident occurred that nearly revealed the truth. Shane decided to surprise his wife by picking her up from work to take her to the doctor for an ultrasound. He arrived at the salon and saw Trudy and Marcus standing very close together at the reception desk. They weren't touching, but their posture and facial expressions suggested more than just a professional relationship. Shane walked into the salon and froze in the doorway, recalls Betty Morgan, a customer who witnessed the scene. "I saw his face, first surprise, then some kind of tension. Trudy and the security guard quickly moved away from each other, but it was too late. "Hi, honey," Shane said, approaching his wife. His voice sounded even, but a shadow of suspicion flashed in his eyes. "Ready to go to the doctor?" "Of course," Trudy replied, quickly gathering her things. Her cheeks were red and her hands were shaking slightly. Marcus pretended to be busy checking the alarm, but Shane gave him a long, searching look. A tense silence fell over the car. "Who's that?" Shane asked when they got outside. "The new security guard, Marcus Wright. Very professional," Trudy replied, trying to sound natural. "He looks friendly," Shane remarked dryly. That evening at home was tense. Shane was silent and pensive, and Trudy was nervous, afraid that her husband suspected something. But by morning, Shane seemed to have forgotten about the incident, immersed once again in plans for the baby's arrival. "I think he just convinced himself that he imagined it," Trudy told Jen. "Shane isn't the kind of person who looks for problems where there aren't any. It was easier for him to believe that everything was fine." Jen was becoming increasingly concerned about her friend's behavior. She could see Trudy teetering on the edge and knew that sooner or later the truth would come out. Rumors about the special relationship between Trudy and the security guard were spreading throughout the salon. "I got calls from clients asking what was going on between Trudy and the new security guard," says Linda Harris. "They saw how they looked at each other, how they talked. In a small town, things like that quickly become the subject of gossip." Jen's last attempt to talk some sense into her friend came a week before she was due. Trudy was 38 weeks pregnant, and the doctor had warned that the baby could come at any moment. "Trudy, I'm begging you, stop," Jen said when they were alone in the salon. "You have a week left before you give birth, maybe less. Then your life will change dramatically. You'll have a baby, a family. Don't ruin everything because of a passing infatuation." "This isn't a passing infatuation," Trudy replied. "I've thought about this every day, every night. I can't go on living a lie. After I give birth, I'm going to tell Shane the truth." "What truth?" Jen asked, horrified. "That I don't love him, that I'm in love with another man, that our marriage was a mistake from the start." "You're out of your mind. You're going to have a baby. Shane will be devastated." "I'm already ruined," Trudy said quietly. "Every day, pretending to be a happy wife, I die a little bit. It's better to hurt now than to live in a fake family for the rest of my life." Jen knew that words wouldn't work on her friend. Trudy made a decision that seemed like the only right thing to do, even though it looked disastrous from the outside. "I suggested she take some time off, go somewhere, think things over in a calm environment," Jen recalls. But she refused to leave the salon. She said she couldn't leave Marcus alone with this situation. Marcus was also experiencing an internal conflict. His feelings for Trudy were sincere, but he understood the complexity of the situation. As a former military man, he was used to taking responsibility, but in this case, he felt helpless. "He asked me what to do," says his friend and security colleague Dan Collins. "He said he was in love with a married, pregnant woman and didn't know what to do. I advised him to quit his job before it was too late, but he said he couldn't leave her." In the days leading up to the birth, the tension in the salon reached a breaking point. Everyone felt that something serious was happening, but no one dared to discuss the situation openly. Trudy worked through the pain, constantly holding her back and sitting down to rest frequently. "She looked like a taut string during the last week," says colleague Susan Clark. "The slightest sound made her flinch. She was constantly looking at her watch and her phone. We all knew that she would go into labor any day now." At home, Shane was putting the finishing touches to his preparations. He installed a baby car seat in the car, packed a bag for the hospital, and checked all the doctor's phone numbers. His excitement was contagious. He told all the neighbors how soon he was going to be a father. Shane was glowing with happiness, recalls Tom Madison. He bought a bouquet of roses for Trudy to give her right after she gave birth. He planned to throw a small party for friends and family as soon as they returned from the hospital with the baby. But Trudy did not share her husband's enthusiasm. The approaching birth caused her not only natural fears, but also dread of the upcoming conversation with Shane. She was determined to confess her feelings for Marcus to him immediately after the baby was born. "I thought that if I told him the truth after the baby was born healthy, it would be less painful," Trudy explained to Jen. I thought the joy of fatherhood would soften the blow. On the morning of December 20th, Trudy woke up with a sharp pain in her stomach. At first, she thought it was just normal pre-labor contractions, but the pain grew stronger and more regular. Shane was in the shower when she realized that she was going into labor. "Shane!" she shouted. "I think it's starting!" The next half hour was a flurry of activity. Shane rushed around the house, gathering things and trying to remember everything he had learned in his parenting classes. Trudy sat on the bed, timing the contractions and thinking about how her life would change forever in a few hours. "Are you ready to be a mom?" Shane asked, helping her get dressed. "Yes," Trudy replied, but there was no confidence in her voice. On the way to the hospital, she sent a message to Marcus. "Labor has started. Everything will change today." He replied immediately, "I'll be thinking of you. Everything will be fine." At Midtown General Hospital, they were greeted by the usual hustle and bustle of the maternity ward. Shane filled out paperwork, talked to nurses, and asked about procedures. Trudy lay on the hospital bed, feeling the moment of truth approaching with each contraction. "We'll see our baby soon," Shane said, taking her hand. Trudy squeezed his fingers and closed her eyes. She knew that this day would be the last day of their marriage, although Shane had no idea yet. In her heart, love for her unborn child, guilt toward her husband, and passionate attachment to the man waiting for her in the waiting room were at war. The decision was made. Immediately after giving birth, when they were alone, she would tell Shane the whole truth about her feelings for Marcus. The maternity ward at Midtown General Hospital was operating as usual on that December day. Carol Whitney, a nurse on duty who had worked in the maternity ward for 15 years, greeted the Thompsons with a professional smile and her usual efficiency. "How far apart are the contractions?" she asked, helping Trudy settle onto a hospital gurney. "Every 5 minutes," Shane replied, holding his wife's hand. "They started around 7 this morning." Trudy was pale, but calm. The contractions were getting stronger, but were still bearable. She was more concerned about the upcoming conversation with her husband than the physical sensations. Each wave of pain reminded her that the time for a decision was approaching. "First births usually take a long time," Nurse Whitney said reassuringly. "You have time to prepare. Mr. Thompson, do you plan to be present for the birth?" "Of course," Shane replied immediately. "We took a special class, and I want to be there for my wife." The delivery room, number 3, was quiet and peaceful. Morning light streamed through the large window, illuminating the white walls and medical equipment. Shane helped Trudy change into a hospital gown and settle into the bed with the adjustable backrest. "How are you feeling?" he asked, stroking her hair. "Fine," Trudy replied, but her voice sounded tense. "A little scared. Everything will be fine. In a few hours, we'll see our baby." Shane beamed with happiness. "I've been waiting for this moment for so long." The doctor on duty was Dr. James Parker, an experienced obstetrician-gynecologist who had delivered half the women in Midtown. He examined Trudy and determined that her cervix was 4 centimeters dilated. "It's still early," he said. "The first stage of labor can last anywhere from 8 to 12 hours. You can walk around the hallway for now. It will help speed things up." The next few hours were spent waiting. Shane didn't leave his wife's side for a minute, massaging her back during contractions, reading aloud from a parenting magazine, and talking about their plans for the future. He was the model husband, attentive and caring. "I've been thinking about names," he said during one of the breaks between contractions. "If it's a boy, Jacob, after my grandfather. If it's a girl, Emily. What do you think?" "Beautiful names," Trudy replied, but her thoughts were far away. Every time Shane talked about their family's future, her heart ached with the premonition that she was about to shatter his dreams. By noon, the contractions had become more intense. Dr. Parker examined the patient again and announced that she was 7 centimeters dilated. "The pushing will begin soon," he said. "Mr. Thompson, if you want to be present for the delivery, you need to get changed." Shane quickly changed into sterile clothing and took his place at the head of the bed. Trudy squeezed his hand during each contraction, and he whispered words of encouragement to her. "You're so strong, so beautiful," he said. "I love you so much. We're going to be wonderful parents." At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the pushing began. The medical staff took their positions, and Dr. Parker began to direct the process. Trudy gathered all her strength to help her baby come into the world. "One more push, Trudy," the doctor encouraged her. "I can see the head." At 2:47 p.m., a baby girl was born. The newborn's first cry filled the room, and the nurse immediately took the baby away for an initial examination. Shane cried with happiness, kissing his wife's forehead. "We have a daughter! Trudy, we have a daughter!" he repeated through his tears. "A healthy girl, 3 kilograms, 200 grams, Nurse Whitney announced as she wrapped the baby in a pink blanket. When the baby was placed on Trudy's chest, she felt a rush of maternal love so strong that for a moment she forgot all her problems. Her daughter's tiny face was wrinkled and red, but beautiful. "She looks like you," Shane whispered, gently touching her little hand. "Our Emily." The next hour was spent undergoing medical procedures. The doctor finished the postpartum procedures, the nurses tidied up the room, and the newborn was taken to the nursery for mandatory procedures. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Trudy and Shane were alone in the room. "I can't believe we're parents," Shane said, sitting on a chair next to his wife's bed. "This is the happiest day of my life. Thank you for our daughter." Trudy lay there, staring at the ceiling. The euphoria of childbirth was beginning to wear off, and with it came the thoughts she had been trying to suppress. Now that the baby was born healthy, it was time for the conversation she had been putting off for so long. "Shane," she called softly, "I need to talk to you." "About what, honey?" He turned to her with a smile. "About how we're going to settle down with Emily? I've been thinking about it." "No," Trudy interrupted him. "About us. About our marriage." Something in her tone made Shane wary. The smile slowly faded from his face. "What do you mean?" Trudy took a deep breath, gathering her strength. "Shane, I have to tell you the truth. I can't live a lie anymore." "A lie? What are you talking about?" Shane's voice was filled with alarm. "I've fallen in love with someone else." Trudy's words burst out of her chest like a long, suppressed cry. Shane froze, not immediately understanding what she had said. "What? For the last few months I've felt lonely in our marriage. You've been so absorbed in your work and your plans for the future that you've stopped seeing me. And then Marcus came along." "Marcus?" Shane asked, his face changing. "The security guard from the salon?" "Yes, we didn't plan it, it just happened. He gave me the attention I wasn't getting at home. We talked, he listened to me, he understood." Shane slowly rose from his chair. His face turned deathly pale. "You cheated on me? While you were pregnant?" "We didn't sleep together," Trudy said quickly. "But I fell in love with him, and I can't pretend to love you anymore." The silence in the room was deafening. Shane stood in the middle of the room, trying to process what he had heard. His world, which had been perfect just a minute ago, was crumbling before his eyes. "You're telling me this on the happiest day of my life?" His voice trembled with barely contained emotion. "I thought it would be better to tell you the truth now that Emily was born healthy. I wanted you to be happy for at least a little while." "You wanted me to be happy?" Shane's voice rose. "You're destroying our family on our daughter's birthday and you're telling me you want me to be happy?" Trudy began to cry. "I'm sorry, Shane. I didn't want to hurt you, but I can't go on living a lie. All these months," Shane paced the room, his voice growing louder. "While I was working like a dog to provide for our family, building a nursery, dreaming about our future, you were having an affair with the security guard?" "It's not an affair, it's love!" Trudy shouted. Those words were the last straw. Shane stopped and looked at his wife with eyes in which love had turned to rage. "Love? he said quietly, which was even scarier than his shouting. You call cheating on a pregnant woman love? Shane, please try to understand. Understand what? That my wife is a whore? The words sounded like a slap in the face. Trudy closed her eyes in pain. Don't say that. I'm still the mother of your daughter. My daughter? Shane suddenly stopped, a new terrible thought entering his mind. Is she really mine? Of course she's mine. I told you that Marcus and I didn't. How can I believe you? If you've been lying to me all these months, how can I be sure of anything? Shane walked over to the window and spun around. His face was contorted with rage and pain. 4 years of marriage, dreams of a family, love for a woman he thought was perfect, all of it had been shattered in an instant. You ruined everything, he said, slowly approaching the bed. Absolutely everything. Something in his tone made Trudy feel scared. Shane, you're scaring me. I'm scaring you? He stopped at the foot of the bed. Do you know what scares me? The thought that I was a complete idiot. That while I loved you, you were laughing at me with that security guard. We never laughed at you. We talked about our feelings, about how hard it was. Shut up! Shane exploded. Just shut up! I don't want to hear your excuses anymore. He grabbed the hospital pillow from the nearby chair. Trudy, weakened by childbirth and frightened by her husband's rage, didn't immediately understand his intentions. Shane, what are you doing? What I should have done a long time ago, he whispered, and covered her face with the pillow. Trudy tried to resist, but she had little strength after giving birth. She beat the pillow with her hands, trying to push her husband away, but he pressed the pillow down with double force. 4 years of pent-up anger and newly found rage came crashing down on the woman he had considered the love of his life just an hour ago. You destroyed everything that was important to me, he said through clenched teeth, not letting up. Our family, our future, my love, everything. The struggle continued for several minutes. Trudy gradually weakened, her movements becoming increasingly sluggish. Finally, her body went limp. Shane let go of the pillow and stepped back. Trudy's face was blue, her eyes closed. He stood over his wife's body, breathing heavily, not fully realizing what had happened. A few minutes later, Nurse Whitney entered the room with discharge papers. Seeing the scene, she screamed and immediately pressed the security button. What have you done? She shouted, checking Trudy's pulse. Shane stood frozen, staring at his wife's motionless body. The reality of what had happened was beginning to sink in. 2 minutes later, hospital security guards burst into the room, followed by Dr. Parker. They immediately tried to resuscitate Trudy, but it was too late. Call the police, said the doctor, closing Trudy's eyes, and detectives. Shane didn't resist when the guards twisted his arms behind his back. He sat in the hospital corridor, staring into space, while Nurse Whitney gave her statement to the patrol officer who had arrived. Detective Emma Ryder received the call at 5:20 p.m. A 42-year-old mother of two, she had worked for the Midtown Police Department for 18 years and had seen it all, but a murder in a delivery room was new even to her. What do we have? She asked Patrol Officer Johnson when she arrived at the hospital. Murder. Trudy Thompson, 28 years old, strangled with a pillow in the delivery room 2 hours after giving birth. The suspect is her husband, Shane Thompson. The witness is the nurse who found the body. Ryder walked into the room where forensic technicians were already photographing the crime scene. Trudy's body lay on the hospital bed, the pillow lying on the floor nearby. Witnesses? The detective asked. Nurse Carol Whitney. She entered the room and found the suspect standing over his wife's body. He was holding the pillow in his hands. Detective Ryder questioned Nurse Whitney in the doctor's office. They seemed like a happy couple, said the shaken woman. He was so attentive during the birth, holding her hand, crying when our daughter was born. I don't understand what could have happened. Did you hear what they were talking about before you went in? No, the room is soundproof. But when I went in, he was standing over her with a pillow. She was already dead. Shane waited for the detective in the hospital interrogation room. When Ryder entered, he was sitting with his head in his hands. "Mr. Thompson, do you understand what happened?" He looked up. There was no remorse in his eyes, only emptiness. "I killed my wife," he said quietly. "She told me she loved someone else on our daughter's birthday. I couldn't take it." News of the tragedy at the hospital spread through Midtown like wildfire. By the evening of December 20th, there wasn't a person in town who didn't know that Shane Thompson had killed his wife, Trudy, on their daughter's birthday. For a small town where the most serious crime in recent years had been the theft of a bicycle, it was a real shock. Detective Emma Ryder spent the entire night gathering evidence and interviewing people who knew the Thompson family. The picture that emerged was more complicated than it seemed at first glance. On the morning of December 21st, Ryder went to Glamour Studio, which was closed due to the tragedy. The first person she questioned was Jen Martinez, the deceased's best friend. "I knew it would end badly," Jen said through tears. "I warned Trudy, begged her to stop, but she was obsessed. She said it was the first time in her life she had felt true love." "Tell me in detail about the relationship between Trudy and Marcus Wright," the detective asked. "It started in September. At first it was just casual conversation, but then they started spending more and more time together. Trudy lit up when she talked about him. She felt lonely in her marriage. Shane was always working and hardly paid any attention to her." "Was there any physical intimacy between them?" "No," Jen replied firmly. "Trudy was too pregnant, and Marcus isn't that kind of man. But the emotional connection was very strong. They wrote to each other, met after work, and made plans for the future." Next, Ryder questioned Marcus Wright. The 33-year-old former soldier was devastated by the news of Trudy's death. When the detective found him in his rented apartment on the outskirts of town, he was sitting at the kitchen table staring out the window. "I knew it would come out sooner or later," he said. "But I didn't think it would end so badly." "Mr. Wright, tell me about your relationship with Mrs. Thompson." Marcus was silent for a long time, then began to speak in a quiet but firm voice. "I fell in love with her from the first day. I didn't plan it. I didn't want it. She was a married woman who was pregnant. But Trudy was special. She was unhappy in her marriage. She felt lonely." "Did you know about her plans to tell her husband the truth?" "Yes. She decided to do it after the baby was born. She thought the joy of having a child would soften the blow for Shane. I tried to talk her out of it, told her to wait and think it over. But she was adamant." Detective Ryder also questioned Trudy's colleagues at the salon. They all agreed that the relationship between the hairdresser and the security guard was obvious to everyone. "They looked at each other like teenagers in love," said manicurist Susan Clark. "The air sparkled when they were together. We all saw that it wouldn't end well." Salon owner Linda Harris added, "Trudy was a good girl, but she was unhappy. She had been complaining for months that her husband didn't notice her, that he only lived for his work. Marcus gave her the attention she lacked at home." Meanwhile, Shane Thompson was in a holding cell at the county jail. He didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't deny the charges, just sat in the corner of the cell and said nothing. When Detective Ryder came in for his second interview, he looked like a man who had lost all touch with reality. "Shane, help me understand what happened in that room," Ryder said. "She ruined everything," he replied in a monotone voice. "I spent 4 years building our family, working like a dog, dreaming of children. And all that time she was thinking about another man." "Did you suspect her relationship with Marcus?" "No, I trusted her completely. I thought we were a happy couple expecting a baby. When she told me the truth, I just lost it. I don't remember picking up the pillow. All I remember is rage." District Attorney David Carter decided to charge Shane with first-degree murder. Although the crime was committed in the heat of the moment, the maximum penalty was sought. "This was the cold-blooded murder of a defenseless woman who had just given birth to a child," Carter said at a press conference. "No circumstances can justify such cruelty." The fate of newborn Emily became a separate tragedy. Shane had no close relatives, and Trudy's parents had died several years ago. The girl was temporarily placed in a shelter for newborns in a neighboring town while social services searched for a family for her. "This little girl will be an orphan because of her father's actions," said Nurse Carol Whitney bitterly. "She will never know her mother, and her father will spend the rest of his life in prison." The tragedy had a huge impact on the community. The residents of Midtown couldn't believe that something like this could happen in their quiet town. Glamour Studio closed for a week after the murders, and when it reopened, many of its customers stayed away. "We all knew that family," said baker Doris Wilson. "Shane seemed like such a good husband, always working and polite. And Trudy was the life of the party. No one could have imagined it would end in murder." Friends and acquaintances were divided in their opinions. Some blamed Trudy for cheating and destroying the family, while others blamed Shane for his inability to forgive and his monstrous cruelty. "Cheating is bad, but murder is much worse," said Tom Madison, Shane's former business partner. "He could have filed for divorce, taken his daughter, started a new life, but he chose violence." Neighbor Robert Davis had a different opinion. "I don't condone what Shane did, but try to understand his situation. His wife confessed to cheating on him on their child's birthday. That could break any man." Marcus Wright left Midtown a week after the tragedy. He was fired from his security job, and the townspeople viewed him as an accomplice to the crime, even though he was technically innocent. "I ruined the life of a wonderful woman," he told Jen Martinez as he said goodbye. "If I had stayed away, she would be alive. I will carry that burden for the rest of my life." Shane Thompson's trial began in March of the following year. The defense attorney sought a reduced sentence, citing temporary insanity and the victim's provocative behavior. But witness testimony and physical evidence were irrefutable. Shane was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He listened to the sentence without emotion, as if it were about someone else. The defendant took the life of a young woman at the height of her happiness, Judge Robert Hall said in his sentencing. He left a newborn child orphaned and inflicted irreparable trauma on the entire community. Jen Martinez moved to another state 6 months after the tragedy. She could no longer work at the salon, where everything reminded her of her deceased friend. "I still blame myself," she admitted in a recent interview with a local newspaper. "Maybe if I had been more persistent, I could have stopped Trudy. Maybe she would still be alive." Glamour Studio closed permanently a year after the murder. Linda Harris was unable to rebuild her business. Too many bad memories were associated with the place. The premises stood empty for a long time, and then a stationery store opened there. Trudy and Shane's daughter, Emily, was adopted by a family from a neighboring town. Her adoptive parents promised to tell her the truth about her origins when she was old enough to understand. Middletown slowly healed the wounds inflicted by this tragedy. Residents tried not to talk about what had happened, but the memory of Trudy Thompson and the terrible outcome of their family drama remained forever in the collective consciousness of the town. The story of Trudy and Shane Thompson served as a warning to the residents of Midtown about how quickly something that seems strong and reliable can be destroyed. Family happiness, love, trust, all of it proved to be as fragile as glass, shattered by a single careless word at the most inopportune moment.